I remember the evening like it was etched into my mind in fire. A little girl vanished without a trace, a nightmare that turned an entire town upside down. And after all these decades, the mystery remains. Candy Marshall was just 4 years old. They say she disappeared from her own backyard in Indiana, 1969. No sign of struggle. No leads, nothing except the eerie silence that swallowed the town whole. But here's something most don't know. Strange lights were seen in the sky that very night, and unexplained phenomena seemed to shadow the investigation every step of the way. Over the years, I've chased every thread, talked to every witness still alive, and even explored whispers that venture beyond this world. This isn't just a cold case. It's a riddle wrapped in shadows and impossible questions, one that still stuns seasoned investigators and haunts the community. Stick with me. What happened that night isn't what you think. It was early November when Candy went missing, the air crisp with the promise of a coming winter, and a kind of quiet that settled over small towns like a protective blanket. Lowell, Indiana was no exception, a place where everybody knew everybody's name and doors were often left unlocked. Candy's family had lived there for generations, and on that day in '69, the neighborhood kids were playing just as they always did, free and wide-eyed, while their parents kept an eye from porches and kitchen windows. Candy, with her bright blonde hair and mischievous grin, was the sort of child everyone adored. She was the youngest of three, the baby sister who could charm the grumpiest neighbor into a smile. She had a favorite doll, a faded pink bear she'd carried everywhere since her second birthday. But on that chilly evening, something changed. She went outside to play and never came back. The frantic search began almost immediately. Neighbors called friends and family. Officers combed the woods and fields surrounding the town. Flyers went up at every street corner. Still, Candy was gone. Not a trace in sight. But here's where things get strange. Several witnesses reported seeing odd, flickering lights in the sky overhead that night. Some claimed to hear strange sounds, low hums, almost mechanical. Others mentioned fleeting shadows darting through the trees, shapes that made no sense in the ordinary world. These accounts were dismissed at first, chalked up to overactive imaginations, or the eerie way the mind fills silence with stories. I wasn't part of the original investigation. I was just a kid myself at the time, but hearing those stories haunted me. What if they were pieces of a puzzle no one was ready to solve? What if Candy's disappearance wasn't just a tragic accident, but something far more sinister and inexplicable? Decades later, I found myself drawn back to those rumors and whispers, determined to dig deeper. I talked to former officers who worked the case, now retired and more willing to share details covertly. I connected with neighbors who had been children then, their memories tinged with the fog of time, but vivid with emotion. And I sifted through the archives of dusty newspapers and fading photographs, looking for anything that could shed light on the darkness. What I uncovered wasn't the neat resolution you'd hope for. Instead, it was a labyrinth of unanswered questions, conflicting reports, and eerie coincidences. The deeper I went, the clearer it became that Candy's disappearance was tangled with unexplainable phenomena, whispers of lights that no one could identify, sightings of shadowy figures lurking just beyond the edge of perception. And that's why this story still stuns investigators. Because no matter how much technology advances, no matter how many cold cases get solved with DNA or surveillance footage, Candy Marshall's case remains a chilling enigma. So buckle up. This journey isn't for the faint of heart. It's a dive into memories, mysteries, and moments that refuse to be forgotten. What happened to Candy that night? What truths lurk behind those flickering lights and shadowed woods? The night Candy vanished clung to the town like a dark secret, whispered behind closed doors and in hushed conversations at kitchen tables long past midnight. Families who once smiled together now exchanged worried glances as if proximity could guard against the growing unease. The police presence was constant, officers checking and rechecking every possible clue, but the trail ran cold, freezing the community in a limbo of fear and sadness. I started digging into the investigation reports and interviewing people still living in Lowell. But what struck me most were the discrepancies and peculiarities in the official accounts details, left uncrossed and unanswered questions quietly tucked away. One witness, an elderly man named Frank, who had been a high school student then, described something chilling. He recalled seeing a series of strange amber glows above the tree line near Candy's backyard, lights that pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. The local sheriff's office dismissed these reports, saying they were just swamp gas or kids imagining things. But Frank wasn't the only one. Multiple neighbors independently reported flashes of unnatural light and odd sounds, resembling low-frequency hums or static electricity. These weird phenomena were never integrated into the official narrative, yet they hinted at a more eerie layer to Candy's disappearance, something that seemed to slip beyond the grasp of normal explanation. Was it possible that these lights and sounds were connected to the disappearance? Or were they merely coincidental whispers of an unsettled tone? Digging further, I uncovered old letters and journals from residents who described cold spots, ethereal mists, and feeling watched on nights surrounding Candy's vanishing. Some spoke of fleeting shadows that moved without source, and animals acting wildly agitated, all classic signs of phenomena skeptics often scoff at. Still, the community was desperate for answers. Families held vigils, local churches prayed, and volunteers combed fields and forests with flashlights and hope. Yet the questions only deepened. Why Candy? Why that night? And what could possibly prevent the truth from surfacing for all these years? Every story needs a human face, and Candy's family endured unimaginable pain. Her mother, Mary, was a strong woman whose grief hardened her, but never silenced her pleas for closure. Friends and relatives described Mary as relentless, sometimes frustratingly stubborn, chasing every lead from police tips to psychic readings, unwilling to let go. Despite her efforts, however, the official investigation stalled. Evidence was scarce or inconclusive. The probable scenarios ranged from accident to abduction, but none fit perfectly. And that is the cruelest part of this story, the way open wounds leave questions festering, feeding suspicion and fear. Over the decades, the case faded from national headlines, but never disappeared from local memory. It became part of the folklore, whispered between generations, a chilling warning, a reminder of things that slip through cracks, no matter how bright the spotlight. I also learned about one particularly intriguing detective, Jim Carver, who took over the case in the mid-1970s. Jim believed there was more than just human cruelty at play. He would later tell me about his own experiences, unexplained equipment malfunctions during stackouts, and a pervasive feeling of being watched that gnawed at his resolve. On one occasion, a surveillance camera inexplicably stopped working just as a supposed suspect entered the area, as if unseen forces were tampering with the investigation itself. Jin's story adds a layer of complexity and eeriness. His conviction in the face of absurd obstacles echoes what some researchers call the shadow trail moments, when investigations into disappearances seem to be blocked by forces both human and otherwise. Was he onto something? Or was it stress and grief playing tricks on his mind? The more I pieced together, the more the edges of reality blurred. Candy's disappearance, framed by official silence and eerie, unexplainable phenomena, became a prism reflecting deeper fears: fear of loss, fear of the unknown, and fear that certain truths might be too terrible to confront. But my quest is far from over. This cold case holds more whispers and signs that I'm just beginning to understand. What happened in Lowell that autumn night in 1969 is more than a story about a missing child. It's a gateway to mysteries that challenge what we think is possible on this planet. Stay with me, because the shadows grow longer, and the truth may yet unsettle the very fabric of belief we cling to. As I continued peeling back the layers of Candy Marshall's disappearance, I found myself confronting not just an unsolved case, but a crossroads where fact and the unexplainable merge into something hauntingly real. The town of Lowell, Indiana, a place that once thrived on its small-town charm, now carried a subtle numbness, as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for closure that never came. People from all walks of life had their own stories about that night. Some dismissed it as coincidence, the result of childhood fantasies and grief-stricken imaginations amplified over the years. Others whispered of something darker, an unseen presence that hovered at the edges of vision, messing with minds and investigations alike. One story I uncovered involved a local farmer named Robert, who claimed to have seen a figure standing near the tree line, not far from Candy's home, silhouetted by an unnatural glow. According to Robert, the figure moved without sound, almost glided, and vanished when he tried to approach. Years later, he confessed that talking about it risked ridicule, but he never forgot the hollow feeling that followed. I met with Patricia, who had been a childhood friend of Candy's older sister. She recalled the family's anguish in vivid terms, the heavy atmosphere that settled over Candy's house after the disappearance, and the strange dreams she and others had in the weeks that followed, visions of cold rooms and unspeakable horrors that felt too real to be imagination. The local police records corroborated many of these eerie accounts, but remained frustratingly silent on them in their official reports. Instead, the files focused on conventional lead suspects with murky pasts, veiled threats, and missing persons theories. There were dead ends, recanted confessions, and at least one suspect whose alibi seemed airtight, yet never fully satisfied the detectives. The more recent efforts to reopen the case emerged mostly from independent investigators intrigued by the mystery and the odd phenomena reported. They brought with them new technology, enhanced photo analysis, audio investigations for those alleged hums and static noises, and even wildlife behavioral experts curious about reports of animals acting erratically in the area. These investigations hinted at something extraordinary, yet elusive, like an invisible thread weaving through ordinary reality, fraying reason and bouncing between nightmare and truth. Some proposed that the cold case might link to a series of similar disappearances across the Midwest, patterns overlooked by authorities and dismissed as unrelated. While skepticism runs deep in many hearts, stories like Candy's leave a peculiar mark because they resist tidy explanations. They challenge the boundary between what we know and what we fear. For an older audience that remembers the late 60s, the story resonates on an intimate level, nostalgia laced with the chilling acknowledgement that some horrors don't fade with time. I can't help but wonder, looking back on those shadowed nights and the community left behind, did Candy simply fall victim to a tragic accident, or is her story a gateway into something larger, more mysterious, that still defies comprehension? I share this not to scare you, but to invite you on a journey through memory, myth, and the maddening gaps in truth. Candy Marshall's case is more than a cold file. It's a puzzle piece in a bigger, darker picture. And with every new whisper and clue picked up after decades, the shadows only deepen. So let's keep peeling this mystery back step by step, story by story, until the truth either shatters or reshapes everything we thought we knew. The passage of time has a peculiar effect on mysteries, like the disappearance of Candy Marshall. It both blurs and sharpens details, allowing some memories to fade while others burn brighter with unanswered questions. For a case that began in the brisk autumn of 1969, the decades have done little to ease the pain or unravel the enigma. Instead, they have cast a long shadow that still stretches over Lowell, Indiana, and into the realm of those who dare to remember. In exploring the case, I learned about a series of odd correspondences that surfaced years after Candy's vanishing letters sent anonymously to the local police and newspaper, cryptic notes that hinted at knowing more than the writers would reveal. One note, particularly disturbing, referenced the watchers in the woods and warned that not all that shines is starfire. These words, cryptic as they were, seemed to echo the reports of strange lights and sensations that many witnesses had described. Whether the notes came from pranksters, grief-stricken locals, or someone with a genuine connection to the events, they injected an unsettling tone that no investigator could ignore. The local law enforcement faced more than just the typical hurdles of a missing child case. Their challenges were compounded by community skepticism, evolving police methods, and the rising tide of paranormal theories that sometimes overshadowed the facts. Some officers confided to me their frustrations with media sensationalism, how stories about unexplained phenomena drew attention, but also muddied the waters for serious investigation. Yet despite the pragmatic resistance, the haunting images and sounds persisted in eyewitness accounts. I met with Dr. Ellen Graves, a retired psychologist who worked with families of missing children, including Candy's. She explained how cases like these leave emotional scars far beyond the immediate loss. The community's collective psyche carries the trauma, manifesting in shared dreams, nightmares, and sometimes even collective hallucinations that can seem to confirm the supernatural elements whispered in hushed tones. Dr. Graves remarked that understanding this psychological impact was crucial not just for closure, but for appreciating how grief and mystery are interwoven. One particularly chilling aspect that emerged was the phenomenon known locally as the Watcher effect. Numerous residents reported a sensation of being observed, of unseen eyes tracking their movements whenever investigations were renewed or key anniversaries approached. People spoke of inexplicable chills down their spines and the recurring feeling that the woods themselves held secrets better left untouched. Paranormal experts who examined the area noted unusual electromagnetic readings and an abnormal concentration of cold spots, phenomena often linked to reported hauntings. Even skeptics in the scientific community found themselves scratching their heads at the data. Was Lowell a geographical anomaly, a place where the veil between realities thinned? Or was it something more human, perhaps fears and stories created by a community desperate to make sense of the senseless? The complexity of the case deepened with the revelation of other disappearances within a 50-mile radius during the late 60s and early 70s. Patterns emerged, children and young adults vanishing without trace, often under similar mysterious circumstances. Some theorists suggested a connection to cult activities or secret government experiments, ideas that sound like the stuff of fiction but gain traction in the absence of explanation. What stands out in this tangled web is that these theories, whether plausible or outlandish, reflect a deeper truth. Candy Marshall's disappearance transcends a mere missing person case. It embodies the human compulsion to seek meaning in chaos and the profound discomfort of facing mysteries that defy resolution. This chapter of the story, rich with psychological insight, community anecdotes, and the intersection of fact with folklore, is not just to inform, but to immerse you in the lingering atmosphere of Lowell, an atmosphere thick with unresolved tension and unspoken fear. As I continued to gather testimonies, sift through archives, and visit the sites involved, the line between reality and speculation blurred, but also illuminated parts of the human experience usually hidden beneath the surface. The next step in our journey will take us even closer to those shadowy edges, where hope, fear, and the inexplicable collide. The disappearance of Candy Marshall in 1969 cast a long and unsettling shadow over the small town of Lowell, Indiana, a shadow that refuses to lift even after more than 5 decades. The story is not just about a missing child. It is about a community grappling with a silence filled with questions, a silence punctuated by unexplained phenomena and whispered fears that refuse to be silenced. That cold November evening started like any other, but it ended with a void that nothing could fill. Candy, a sprightly 4-year-old known for her golden curls and infectious laughter, had stepped into her backyard and simply vanished. No one knew why or how. Search parties scoured the nearby woods and fields. Parents held vigil late into the night, and the police followed every possible lead. Yet, amid the frantic search, strange occurrences began to weave into the narrative, a pattern both perplexing and chilling. Residents spoke of mysterious lights that flickered just beyond the tree line, ghostly hums that hovered in the chilly air, and shadows that moved without source. Children reported dreams vivid and unsettling about Candy, dreams that seemed to bleed into reality. Adults, meanwhile, shared stories of a pervasive feeling of being watched, of a presence lurking just out of sight. These reports, dismissed at the time as mere folklore or mass hysteria, now form an eerie backdrop that colors the entire investigation. Diving into old police records, I uncovered how law enforcement struggled to reconcile the tangible with the intangible. Official reports cataloged suspects, timelines, and possible motives, but they barely scratched the surface of the unexplained events reported by eyewitnesses. Some officers, particularly Detective Jim Carver, who took over the case several years after Candy's disappearance, confided in me their belief that something beyond the human realm was at play. Jim recounted how his equipment malfunctioned inexplicably during surveillance, and how he often felt an unseen force hindered the investigation, adding another layer of complexity to the already confounding case. The human toll was enormous. Candy's family was shattered, particularly her mother, Mary. Strong-willed yet heartbroken, Mary became a relentless seeker of truth, chasing every lead and refusing to accept the growing vacuum of despair. Her tireless quest kept the case alive in the public consciousness and inspired others to pursue answers. But it also exposed her to frustration and deep sorrow that colored the town's collective memory. As the first pieced together personal testimonies, several patterns emerged, particularly the so-called watcher effect, a phenomenon in which locals felt persistently observed, particularly when the case gained renewed attention. Electromagnetic anomalies and cold spots were reported in the area by investigators and paranormal experts alike, challenging scientists and skeptics with data they couldn't easily explain. Adding to the mystery was a cluster of similar disappearances documented around the same period in neighboring towns. These incidents shared common threads: sudden vanishings without a trace, strange lights reported nearby, and a chilling silence from official channels about any possible connections. This pattern sparked theories ranging from secretive cult activity to unexplained extraterrestrial involvement, though definitive proof has remained elusive. Psychological experts, including Dr. Ellen Graves, emphasized how the trauma of such unresolved tragedies extends beyond the immediate victims, infecting whole communities with a kind of collective grief that manifests in dreams, hallucinations, and shared experiences. These phenomena blur the lines between reality and the supernatural, making it difficult to discern the truth amidst layers of fear and speculation. My investigations took me through decades of fading memory, technical dead ends, and cultural shifts that altered how the story was told and remembered. Yet the core anguish remained unchanged: a community haunted by the absence of a child, by unanswered questions, and by the shadowy possibility that some mysteries are not meant to be unraveled. This story is more than a cold case. It is a haunting journey into human resilience, the unyielding search for justice, and the unsettling spaces where reality bends and questions linger unanswered. Every whisper, every strange light, every shadow in the forest fuels a relentless need to understand what happened to Candy Marshall and why her story still stuns investigators and unsettles a town more than 50 years later. Stay with me as I continue to explore the depths of this chilling mystery, revealing new insights, forgotten voices, and moments that may finally bring us closer to the truth or plunge us further into the unknown. The more I delved into the details of Candy Marshall's disappearance, the more I realized that this cold case was not just about a missing child. It was a tapestry woven with human emotion, fear, and something more elusive that defied straightforward explanation. The stories I gathered painted a portrait of a town gripped by grief and bewildered by phenomena that stretched the limits of belief. One of the locals who had never quite let the memory fade was Helen, a schoolteacher who lived a few streets down from Candy's home. She spoke of that night with a trembling voice, recalling how the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath as the search parties combed the woods. But Helen told me something that wasn't in the police reports. She saw figures near the edge of the forest, shadows that moved with unnatural speed and precision. When she approached, the figures vanished like smoke. There was something wrong that night, she said, eyes wide with the memory. Not just the disappearance, but how the air felt. Heavy. Watching. Such accounts were surprisingly common, yet they didn't fit into the neat categories investigators preferred. It was as if the town was caught between worlds, the tangible realm of facts and the intangible whispers of mystery. The investigation itself was hampered by a series of frustrating dead ends. Suspects were questioned. Some had motives, others alibis too airtight to penetrate. Yet none held up under scrutiny. One man in particular, a drifter with a dark past, became the focal point for suspicion. Still, without evidence, he was released. The police files contained no confession, no conclusive proof, only suspicion intertwined with uncertainty. I also spoke to retired Detective Jim Carver, whose dedication to the case became almost legendary. Jim described how, at times, his equipment would malfunction inexplicably during stackouts, how notes would go missing or be found altered. It was like the case had its own will, he told me. You push, and it pushes back. Stories like Jim's, whether literal or metaphorical, contribute to the haunting aura surrounding the case. The idea that forces beyond human control might interfere adds a layer of supernatural intrigue that both attracts and repels believers and skeptics alike. Beyond the immediate circle of Lowell, the ripple effects of Candy's disappearance influenced neighboring towns. Similar cases of children vanishing under strange circumstances surfaced, and old-timers whispered about a pattern linking them: lights in the sky, shadows in the woods, eerie hums accompanying disappearances. These connections, while circumstantial, suggest a network of mysteries that defy easy explanation. Psychologists emphasize the collective trauma experienced by communities facing unresolved loss. Grief, anxiety, and unanswered questions often manifest as shared hallucinations or visions. These phenomena, while subjective, really affect how the community perceives and processes the tragedy. The local press, initially extensive in its coverage, slowly tapered off as leads dried up. Yet anniversary articles and renewed interest from paranormal investigators reignited public curiosity from time to time. Each resurgence brought new eyewitnesses forward, some old, some new, and added fresh layers to the narrative. Through months of interviews, archive searches, and late-night discussions, I began to see Candy Marshall's disappearance as more than a single story. It is a prism reflecting universal fear's loss, the unknown, the sense that some truths might be just beyond reach. This story is as much about those who remember as those who vanished. It's about how one small town wrestles with a mystery that refuses to be forgotten, about the thin line between hope and despair. As we continue, we will delve into specific pieces of evidence, testimonies that challenge what we think is possible, and the emotional echoes that still ring through Lowell's streets. Candy Marshall's disappearance is a story wrapped in layers of grief, unanswered questions, fragmented memories, and eerie phenomena that stretch beyond the ordinary. In exploring this mystery, more than just facts surfaced. The emotional fabric of a town, caught in an unending storm, came to light. That fateful night in Lowell was quiet in its chilling way, but it whispered secrets no one was ready to face. Candy, a vivacious 4-year-old, stepped into a backyard she knew well and vanished. Witnesses from that night remembered strange, flickering amber lights just beyond the tree line, accompanied by low, hum-like sounds that set the hairs on their necks on edge. While initial dismissals labeled these reports as hallucinations or natural phenomena, their consistency across numerous accounts suggested something more mysterious at work. I met Helen, a schoolteacher who lived near Candy's home. She described figures moving with unnatural grace near the woods, disappearing when approached. Local folklore now refers to this as the watching, an ominous presence sensed on the town's edge. These whispers not only haunted the community, but complicated law enforcement efforts, where practical leads clashed with inexplicable reports. Retired Detective Jim Carver shared how the investigation often felt like battling an invisible adversary. Communication devices malfunctioned, key documents disappeared, and witnesses recanted for fear or confusion. Jim's belief in an unseen force obstructing the truth added a supernatural shade to a case already burdened with sorrow. The family's anguish deepened as the investigation yielded little. Mary Marshall, Candy's mother, channeled her grief into relentless pursuit of answers, confronting dead ends while inspiring the community to remember her daughter. The annual vigils, candlelit and heavy with emotion, kept the case alive and kept the shadows lurking. Patterns emerged beyond Lowell. Similar disappearances, unexplained lights, and strange occurrences spread across neighboring towns, sparking theories from cult activity to extraterrestrial involvement. Psychologists like Dr. Ellen Graves explained how collective trauma and grief can manifest as shared visions and hallucinations, blurring reality with fear and hope. The local press faded, leaving paranormal investigators and independent researchers to piece together the puzzle. Reports of electromagnetic anomalies and cold spots in Lowell resisted scientific explanation, deepening the mystery. This saga is not just a cold case. It is a prism refracting humanity's fear of the unknown, loss, and unanswerable questions. Candy's story embodies a town and generations haunted by absence and wonder, disbelief, and tenuous hope. As I continue to tell this story, we delve deeper into witness testimonies that challenge belief, baffling evidence, and the emotional echoes that refuse to quiet. The truth behind Candy Marshall's disappearance may never be certain, but the search reveals profound truths about the human spirit in the face of the unknown. The investigation into Candy Marshall's disappearance reveals a haunting tapestry woven with threads of uncertainty, grief, and inexplicable phenomena. As my research deepened, I understood the case's chilling aura was not merely a byproduct of tragedy, but a complex interplay of human emotion, mystery, and the unexplainable. Lowell, Indiana, in 1969 was a quintessential small town where life moved at an unhurried pace, and neighbors knew one another well. Candy's disappearance shattered that calm, casting a pall over the community. I interviewed several locals who were children at the time. Their recollections were tinged with fear and awe. Among them was Tommy, a boy who had played near Candy that day. He spoke of seeing lights in the sky that danced like fireflies, but bigger and brighter, and a strange hum that seemed to vibrate in the very ground beneath them. These descriptions were eerily consistent with other eyewitness accounts, but remained absent from official reports. The official investigation was marked by contradictions and unusual delays. I reviewed police logs revealing missed leads and inexplicable setbacks. For instance, search dogs behaved unpredictably near a specific wooded area, refusing to enter or suddenly veering off track. Witnesses often changed their stories or expressed fear of retaliation for speaking out. There was an unspoken tension in the town, as if some truths remained too dangerous to confront. A significant figure in the investigation was Detective Jim Carver, whose involvement brought renewed focus but also mysterious complications. Jim described a pattern of technical failures, during stackouts and surveillance, as well as a persistent sensation of being watched. He believed these occurrences were more than mere coincidence. It was like the case itself didn't want to be solved, he confided. The psychological impact on Lowell's residents was profound. Dr. Ellen Graves, who studied the case's emotional aftermath, emphasized how collective trauma manifests in communities. Shared grief often blurs into shared hallucinations or visions, making it difficult to distinguish between reality and the mind's coping mechanisms. These phenomena added layers of complexity to both the investigation and public perception. Beyond Lowell, I uncovered reports of similar disappearances in surrounding areas, each accompanied by strange lights and unexplained noises. Some linked these incidents to secretive cult activities or alleged government experiments, theories that remain speculative but highlight widespread fear and suspicion during that turbulent era. The local media initially provided extensive coverage, but sensationalism eventually gave way to fatigue as leads dried up. Paranormal investigators later revived interest, noting electromagnetic anomalies and cold spots around Lowell phenomena, challenging conventional science and adding to the case's mystique. Candy Marshall's disappearance, therefore, stands as more than a cold case. It is a reflection of humanity's confrontation with loss, the unknown, and the limits of understanding. The unresolved nature of the mystery continues to haunt a community and captivates those who seek answers beyond the tangible. As I prepare to share more from my investigations, we will explore first-hand testimonies, puzzling evidence, and the emotional landscapes shaped by this unsolved tragedy. The journey is far from over, and the shadows still linger. Candy Marshall's disappearance remains a haunting mystery, a forever open wound in Lowell, Indiana, and a riddle that continues to defy explanation. As my investigation drew to its close, I found myself reflecting not only on the pieces we uncovered, but also on all that remains frustratingly out of reach. Through decades of searching, retellings, interviews, and revisits to forgotten corners, the enigma persists. Candy was a bright spark extinguished too soon, her story entwined with silence, shadows, and strange phenomena that refused to be dismissed. The flickering lights, the low hums, the inexplicable cold spots, those elements linger like a breath on the back of the neck, a signpost to truths hidden just beyond the veil of understanding. The community of Lowell carries the weight of her absence with both sorrow and resilience. Generations have grown up with the story as a thread woven into their collective memory, a cautionary tale and a call for vigilance. Mary Marshall's tireless quest embodied the indomitable human spirit in the face of incomprehensible loss, reminding us that even when answers evade us, the search itself honors the missing. The official investigation, while thorough in its scope, was at times baffled by anomalies and what some called interference, whether natural or not. Technical malfunctions, disappearing evidence, conflicting witness accounts, and a pervasive sense of being watched all add a layer of shadow beyond mere human obstruction. Experts who analyze such cold cases highlight how grief and mystery can create what psychologists call traumatic ambiguity, a state where the unknown gnaws at both reason and emotion. This case exemplifies the tormented community suspended between hope and despair, fact and folklore. Others speculate about the broader context of similar disappearances across the region during that era, possibly linked by unseen forces or darker human deeds. Theories range from secret cult activity and abductions to extraterrestrial involvement, none conclusively proven, but all part of the eerie tapestry. What is certain, though, is that Candy Marshall's case is not just a story of loss, but a reflection on the fragility of safety, the limits of understanding, and the enduring human need to seek light even in the overwhelming dark. For those of us who keep searching, whether investigators, family, or curious onlookers, the case challenges us to question how much we really know about the world we live in and reminds us how some mysteries may never be fully solved. But the story deserves to be told, retold, and never forgotten. Because within the silence, within the shadows, lies a poignant truth about the human spirit, its capacity to endure, to question, and to hope. This concludes the narrative journey into the chilling cold case of Candy Marshall. May it inspire reflection, vigilance, and compassion for those left behind by unexplained tragedies.